On the 4th of November 1972, a British Army helicopter made the 12-mile journey from a jail in Belfast to an abandoned World War II US Air Force base in Long Kesh. The only passenger was a senior loyalist paramilitary, Gusty Spence. He would spend the next 12 years here.
It was a dark, dismal, rainy Saturday night. Desolate place. There was a mass of wire, German razor wire, which is a vicious thing. Dogs, searchlights, army in control. What else would you call it except a prisoner of war camp? That's what it was.
This is the story of The Maze, a prison like no other. 29 prison officers were killed here, and 10 men starved themselves to death. The prison was built to contain the men who created the Troubles, the violent conflict between the Republicans, Catholics who wanted Northern Ireland to join the Irish Republic, and the Loyalists, Protestants loyal to Britain. It became the very center of the struggle, and finally a key to unlocking the fragile peace process. Now lying empty, these prison cells held the gunmen responsible for 30 years of bloody history. In the early 1970s, Northern Ireland was in turmoil. There was open violence on the streets. The Conservative government in London had introduced imprisonment without trial to combat unrest.
There was a real battlefield going on here. And when I think back now, it frightens the life out of me, what went on then.
At that stage, I mean, as far as I was concerned, if they can plant a bomb in the Shankill and kill 4 people, I was prepared to plant a bomb in the Falls and kill 8.
Convictions for terrorist offences were growing. Among those arrested was the IRA, the Irish Republican Army leader in Belfast, Brendan Hughes. Hughes had been on the run for 3 years. He was flown to the Maze with another leading Republican, Gerry Adams.
Obviously, it was big news when people like myself and Gerry Adams was arrested, because the media had built up this whole image about me and Gerry. So when they flew us in, all these people were on the roofs with Loyalist flags, Unionist flags, Union Jacks, cheering the fact that we were imprisoned.
Hughes was a member of the Provisional IRA. He was caught with explosives and sentenced to 15 years.
When I got to prison, I felt a great sense of relief. At least I was alive. My war for that period was over.
The prison opened in 1971 when the Long Kesh Air Base was hurriedly converted. In 1972, it was renamed the Maze. Prisoners were granted special category status in recognition of the political motivation behind their crimes. This was to have untold consequences for the prison and for the conflict as a whole. Inmates were not required to work or wear a prison uniform. They ran their own lives behind the wire. They saw themselves as prisoners of war, not criminals. This secret footage, smuggled out by the Protestants, portrays the prisoners as disciplined POWs. Commander of the Loyalist prisoners was Gusty Spence.
There had to be some form of regime which respected the rights of everyone. And that regime was discipline. It was a British Army discipline.
Gusty Spence, Ulster Volunteer Force, was sentenced to life for a sectarian murder.
Everybody was terrified of Gusty. His reputation was that of a military person. I mean, you had to stand to attention, call him sir. Gusty looked at it in terms of us being young men that had volunteered as soldiers and treated us as soldiers.
8 o'clock in the morning, it would have been Reveille. After Reveille, it was either a 3 or 5 mile run, depending on the weather. Following that, it would have been showers and muster parade at 10 o'clock. Muster parade every morning, except Sunday.
Be brave, my darling, don't give up the fight, and think of all your...
A relatively ordered life inside the prison was in sharp contrast to the chaos engulfing much of Northern Ireland. In 1972 alone, there was Bloody Sunday in Derry, an IRA bombing campaign in central Belfast, sectarian attacks and street riots. 496 people were killed.
On the streets, we were killing each other. But once we were in the prison, there was a common adversary.
There was also a common goal: escape.
The most important person in the cage was the escapes officer. And if you come up with an idea, you had to go to the committee. Just think of Holditz. We had the same structure. It's one thing we had to thank the British for. How do you escape?
Well, we have found a considerable number of tools of the various natures, which one could certainly say were not going to be used for hobby making or making models of any kind.
I understand you found 2 small tunnels as well.
Yes. I wouldn't say tunnels, no, 2 holes. One was an actual hole and one was the start of a hole only.
There's all sorts of underground tunnels and so forth. We were constantly digging tunnels, constantly.
Tunnels are very, very dangerous things. And one of these tunnels were being built, the water seeped in. And I remember a fella coming to me at 2 o'clock in the morning and, "Sir," he says, "there's very strange noises down this tunnel." He says, "That's probably water. Maybe a bit of rat, I don't know." So I went down anyhow, and you had to go down in your underclothes. And sure enough, there was strange noises. The Provos had lost their way from compound 16, I think it was, and they were digging in the yard tunnel, so get away the hell at me, you know. So they were a wee bit red-faced, perhaps maybe the next day. They'd lost their direction.
The leaders of the rival paramilitary groups declared a truce or a no-conflict policy. A dialogue had begun.
On tuck shop days, maybe some provisional area had run short of sugar or whatever. If it was our particular day to shop, we would have bought extra sugar and thrown it across to them. Then, whenever they shopped, they would have returned the gesture. Those type of things.
Prisoners helped each other communicate between compounds.
This is a rather ingenious tennis ball which the prisoners used as a means of communication. They were obviously keen to get information passed as quickly as possible from one compound to another. And I mean, it didn't matter if there was a loyalist compound passing it to a loyalist and they had to go through a Republican compound, the Republicans would have picked up the ball and thrown it on into the next loyalist compound.
Inmates on both sides organised seminars on politics and Irish history. For many, it was the first time they had explored the causes of the conflict.
My first question whenever a volunteer came in, "Why are you here?"
Why are you here? You know, and it was the standard question that everybody was afraid of.
And it was always the same answer, you know.
The standard reaction, of course, was because it was caught. You know, why? What do you mean?
Oh, no. That's the reason why you're here. But why are you here? Why are you fighting this war?
Republican and Loyalist leaders even formed a camp council to discuss common grievances.
I remember Gusty, who was OC of the Loyalist prisoners at that time, and Billy McKee, who was OC of the Republicans at that time, having discussions. And this, he's talking to Gusty Spence, right? And that was the doors beginning to open.
We seen Long Kesh, and it was a microcosm of Northern Ireland. You had your particular ghettos. The leaders of those groups came together to legislate as a whole. I believe that that was the first step in an embryonic peace process.
But this dialogue was not destined to last. In 1974, after alleged brutality by prison officers, the Republicans set fire to their compounds. From the wreckage arose a new prison and a new regime. In it, there would be no room for political dialogue between enemies. The old compounds, with their echoes of a prisoner of war camp, were swept away. From now on, prisoners would be locked in conventional cells in 12 blocks, each built in the shape of the letter H.
Living conditions in the new part of the maze are a great improvement on the old hutted compounds, and the majority of the prisoners in the H blocks have always conformed to the prison rules.
We all got our postings to whatever station we were going to. And the first thing I was told was, well, anything you've learned, forget it. This is the maze you're in, and it works its own unique way.
It's a formidable structure. It's like a fortress. And you go through this array of concrete and wire and barbed wire and fences and security controls. That is only to get in through the front wall and in through the front gate.
Brandon Bick McFarland, provisional IRA, received a life sentence for a 1975 bomb attack that killed 6 Protestants. In London, the Labour government wanted to take the politics out of the prison. On March the 1st, 1976, special category status was withdrawn. From now on, everyone convicted of terrorist offences would be regarded as an ordinary criminal. The prison regime was transformed overnight.
They had us locked up, and they had control, and they loved it. Hughes 704, that was my number, Hughes 704. That's how they flaunted it. They gave me a number, and I wasn't Brenton Hughes anymore.
The reality is that they weren't ordinary prisoners. The reality is these are people who are in because of a cause. Now, you can say that's political, you can say it's terrorism, you can say it's patriotism. Depends which side of the fence you're looking from. They were trying to run it like a proper British prison when it wasn't a proper British prison.
The flashpoint came in late 1976 when Paddy Quinn, an IRA prisoner, was ordered to put on a prison uniform. He refused. It was the beginning of what became known as the blanket protest.
They told me to strip naked and give me a towel, put the towel around me, marched me to the cell, and was on the blanket.
There is nothing as degrading as to strip a person, male or female, and leave them there. I don't even have to beat them. Just look at them and degrade them with your eyes. These people became perfectionists at this.
Prisoners refusing to wear a uniform forfeited all privileges and were locked in their cells 24 hours a day, wearing only their prison blanket.
You had no stimulation, no magazines, books, papers, radio, exercise, fresh air, nothing, absolutely nothing. Complete and total isolation. I have to be perfectly honest, see, for the first 3 or 4 weeks, it was a nightmare, an absolute nightmare. I didn't know if I was going to survive it.
There was always a panic bell in the cell, right? And men came to breaking point and they broke and hit the bell. And you'd hear the prison guards, 2 or 3 coming down, singing, whistling. Another one spit the dust, another one spit the dust. And they brought this uniform down. Initially, that man got abuse from his comrades until after a period, it began to register in most people that he could be next.
Show your solidarity with the men in H block only dressed in a blanket by joining this parade.
By 1978, the blanket protest was no nearer to victory. But the government had also failed to remove the politics from the H blocks.
They could not criminalise us. There was going to be resistance to this. I think they seriously underestimated the resistance that was going to come.
By the late 70s, life in many Loyalist and Republican areas was dominated by the maze. For prisoners' families, the weekly visit became a form of pilgrimage. Marion Jameson was 17 with a baby daughter when her husband was convicted of the attempted murder of 2 Republicans.
For me, it was for better, for worse, and this was worse. He got 20 years, and it just seemed like a lifetime. I remember him saying he didn't expect me to wait, and I said, look, I've already made the decision. I'm going to be waiting, I'll be visiting, and I don't want it ever mentioned again.
Almost every family had a member, a cousin, a brother, a husband in Long Kesh, so it was a way of life for us.
Morgan McCauley's brother, Mickey Devine, a Republican, was serving 12 years for arms offences.
wasn't a nice place to bring children, and I didn't like having to bring her down there. But it was the only way that she was going to see her dad, and to go through the search as well, when even they would search her. They would even have felt the nappy and checked that you weren't trying to smuggle things in.
Many visits had an ulterior motive: smuggling. There was a two-way traffic in messages written on cigarette papers, as well as more threatening objects.
Platform shoes, which would have been the height of fashion in the 70s, provided prisoners and their visitors with areas to conceal more sinister items.
The blanket protesters realized the value of contact with the outside. To take visits, they had to put on the prison uniform, but first they would modify their trousers.
All the trousers, the uniforms that they wore, were all ripped at the rear end, so that for access.
The woman would have passed it across the table quickly. The man would have grabbed, the prisoner would have grabbed it and sat between his legs like that, and eventually just work it up the back passage.
I remember one visit. It was a girl from Belfast. She had a radio for me. The radio was a little medicine bottle and a crystal inside it. They used to do miniature Republican newses for us. Didn't she have this wrapped around the radio? And the thing ended up, it was about that size, and I had to take this back on the visit. The visit wasn't too bad, but getting it back out again was excruciating, to say the least.
The prison authorities responded with extreme search methods.
The mirror search was because prisoners were coming back from visits with stuff up their rectum. I say, I'm not sticking my finger up somebody's ass, put it that way.
We were asked to stand over a mirror and squat.
They tell you, take your towel off, take your towel over the mirror, you wouldn't go over it. There'd be about maybe 4 screws there. Grab a hold to you, drag you over the mirror.
A prison officer would have to put a knee in behind his knee and exert a pressure down.
A member of staff shone the torch onto the mirror and could see. We called that man the stargazer, for obvious reasons.
Very humiliating for me as a person. I'm sure it was probably a lot more humiliating for them. But the reality is, the environment that we lived in, we existed in, anything could be brought in.
The British government has consistently refuted allegations of prisoners being assaulted by warders in H blocks. But intimate body searching is carried out for security reasons.
Antagonism between prison officers and protesting prisoners escalated.
Going down a wing with 50 people who all had the potential to kill you is not an easy job.
I've seen staff got a face full of boiling tea from one of these prisoners, because we used to feed these prisoners. We used to go to the door, give it to them, give them a mug of tea, and they would throw it in your face. Right, that's no problem. That prisoner had to be restrained and put into the cell block. If that's the case, yes, we would go in and restrain that prisoner. What we used was tactics that we were taught to use. It was not brutality.
If I had had a weapon in Long Kesh at that period, I would have no problem shooting these people.
The blanket protest had failed to win concessions within the prison. The authorities now increased the pressure. They ordered prisoners to wear uniforms before leaving their cells to go to take a shower or use the lavatory.
We said, no, we're not doing that. So chamber pots were overflowing in cells, so there was urine spilt all over the floors, and the only way to get rid of it was toss it out the window. When they put it at the windows, they came around and they blocked up the windows. So then they started pushing it out the door, and they came up with a squeegee and pushed it back in again.
The disposal of human waste now became both a symbolic act and the actual weapon of protest.
At the beginning, the people just kept their waste in the corner, and then people were saying, look, that's going to smell. They kill the sort of smell in the cell. The best way to do it was to spread it around the wall. So it was like, if you like, it was a decision that was born out of necessity.
Raymond McCartney, Director of Operations, Provisional IRA, Derry Brigade, sentenced to life for the murder of 2 Protestants.
You walked in at the start, you would smell it, but after a couple of weeks you didn't bother you. It wasn't the first time I stood there, had a cup of tea and a sandwich in the cell.
We were still fighting the war in the jail, and that's what it was. We weren't dying yet. We were still fighting them. They were still trying to break us.
I seen the hair growing down his back. I seen the vermin walking down his cheeks, his teeth turning into cheese, and the smell, absolutely appalling. I went outside and nearly vomited, but he didn't know that.
We were lying on the floor with one blanket, no pillows. Maggots coming out of the corner. Many's the night we woke up and maggots all over you. You know, with excess food was left, with your excreta going into the corner and so forth. The seagulls used to love the blanket men, because most mornings we got up and fed the seagulls the maggots that you'd slept with all night.
You talk about the terrible conditions. You created the conditions.
Yeah. Well, we would disagree with that, as we never created the policy in the first place, you know. The prisons was built for that purpose, to undermine the Republican movement. We had to get our message across why these things happened.
But their suffering was failing to win the wider political support they needed.
In June 1980, after investigating the situation in the maze, the European Commission of Human Rights concluded that the IRA prisoners had no grounds whatever for claiming special political status, and that their filthy conditions were all self-imposed by the prisoners themselves.
By late 1980, there were almost 500 men on the protest. The Catholic Church sought to break the stalemate, and Cardinal O'Fee made a visit.
I was hardly able to speak because I was afraid of vomiting dirt around the walls and excreta and rotten food and so on, and slops emptied, thrown around the place. It was a horrible state of affairs.
But Mrs. Thatcher was in no mood to compromise. Lord Mountbatten and her close friend Ery Neave had recently been assassinated, and the IRA had killed 18 soldiers at Warren Point.
There can be no such thing as political status. If ever you were to call a crime a political crime, you would be putting the lives, all of the people, at stake. Murder, maiming, bombing, violence are crimes. They're crimes against humanity.
After 4 years, the dirty protesters had nowhere to go. Their protest had failed. The prison authorities ordered the forced cleaning of the cells and the prison. But if the British government thought this would break Republican resistance, they were mistaken. IRA commander Brendan Hughes decided to escalate the confrontation.
I remember Brendan Hughes getting up to the door, and he told us, anybody thinking about hunger strike, he says, this isn't for fun. He says, hunger strike is a terrifying experience.
I warned everyone that someone's going to die. We may all die in this hunger strike. Be prepared for it. Don't put your name forward unless you're prepared to die. We believed that the support was there, and we could break Thatcher on this.
The IRA Army Council strongly opposed a hunger strike because it felt that it should be in control. But the men in the H blocks insisted. On the 27th of October 1980, Brendan Hughes and 6 others refused food.
I used to leave 2 meals down on the floor. Breakfast time, dinner time, supper time. My meal remained there. The guy who was in the cell with me ate his. And it became so embarrassing for him that I would turn my back and face the wall while he was eating. And there was a slight bit of envy there, right? There was this guy sitting behind me eating, and I could hear him eating. I could smell the food.
Meals were brought into them every time. A meal was taken out, a new meal was left in, and it was recorded that the prisoner was refused. There's nothing I can do to make them eat. I'm not going to sit there and throw it down their throat. Hold them down there, and then I get accused of brutality then.
The idea of protesters prepared to starve themselves to death cast these men, usually seen as terrorists, in a new light.
Raymond McCartney has set himself on the road to Republican martyrdom. Now aged 26, he spent the last 8 years of his life fighting the British. McCartney is serving life imprisonment for 2 murders.
Now he has the support of those who march in his home city.
When a camera crew filmed Raymond McCartney, the hunger strike got its enduring image.
It was the first time I'd ever faced a camera in my life. The fella who was doing it knelt down beside the bed, and I think he asked me, why should the British government give in to your demands, you know?
We and my 6 comrades are prepared to go through with this, and we are prepared to die to prove that we are special prisoners and our 5 basic demands are just.
There wasn't a great deal of fat in any of us. Your body eats that up first, then it works on the muscles. Your brain takes the glucose out of your muscles till eventually that all goes, and then your body starts to work off the glucose in your brain, and that starts to go. And that's when your eyesight goes, your hearing goes, your smelling goes, and then that chew on the way out.
They expect to die, and then others will take their place. There's no doubt about that. But I'd hope that wiser counsels will prevail with the British authorities and with the various negotiators, and they'll be able to defuse the situation.
Throughout, the strike leaders negotiated with the British government. 53 days into their strike, they believed they had an agreement.
We were holding out and holding out. We believed we had it. We had it, right? But we wanted it in writing.
The strikers were promised that a document which granted their key demands was on its way. Also on the same day, one hunger striker, Sean McKenna, was on the verge of death. Under this intense pressure, Hughes called a halt, and the strikers ate their first food.
One of the good fellas, medical officer, he went and he made us all scrambled eggs. Right? And in the middle of the night he came around with more food, toast and jam, and Jesus, it was heaven. Right? We'd got it, we'd won.
But the mood soon changed. When the document arrived, it was not what the prisoners had expected.
The end of the hunger strike stemmed from a document by Mr. Atkins which was given to the prisoners and appeared to mean a settlement of the whole prison issue. It became obvious that what the prisoners thought they'd been offered and what the prison authorities were prepared to give them were two very different things.
Over the next days, their hopes evaporated. The hunger strikers had been outmaneuvered.
I wished to die. I didn't want to live. I remember squealing at God, if you're up there, please take me.
Faced with another defeat, the H-Block protesters remained defiant. Command of the Provisional IRA in the prison had passed to a 27-year-old gunman from Belfast, Bobby Sands. He began to talk about a second hunger strike.
What did you say to him?
Don't. I begged him not to. I begged him to go about it a different way.
When I explained to him, I said, Bobby, this will cause great distress, first of all, to your own family and your relations and your friends if you do this. And secondly, I said, it'll cause convulsions outside. But he was tunnel vision on the prison world. Then he said, greater love than this no man has, than a man lays down his life for his friends. And I said, that's okay, Bobby, I'm not going to argue with you any further. Because he was in good conscience.
So began a chain of events that would give the Republican movement a new generation of martyrs and transform Sinn Féin into a potent political force. On March the 1st, 1981, Bobby Sands refused food. One by one, new prisoners would join him.
You were scared. No, there's no point saying otherwise. You were scared of what was ahead of you, you know. Obviously, you begin to notice the loss of weight. Your sense of smell increases. It increases dramatically, as a matter of fact. You could smell things like I could never really smell before. The smell of water was revolting. Even before you put it up to your mouth at all, you could smell the water. You know, you were heaving nearly before you drank it. Start throwing up green bile, you know.
As the first hunger strikers grew weaker, the government remained unmoved.
What happens when one of them dies?
Well, he dies. He's carried out in a coffin as the protesting prisoners, the fasting prisoners in the Republic in Dublin were carried out in coffins in 1940, and it's a tragedy for the man and his family.
There was a dreadful colonialism about the whole thing. Colonialism, we know better than you. Even though some of them never were in Ireland till they arrived the night before. They'd come in and listen to you, they knew better. It was a disastrous non-communication between the British mind and the Irish mind.
There are signs that the provisionals may be scoring points in the propaganda war to influence Irish-American public opinion.
The strike was now world news, and international coverage was increasingly sympathetic.
I say that they should give them what they want, their 5 demands. That's how I think of it, and it's a load of nonsense what Maggie Thatcher's doing about it.
2 months into the strike, a member of the British Parliament representing Northern Ireland died. Bobby Sands was nominated to run in the resulting election. Catholics who felt sympathy for him and the other hunger strikers could elect Sands. For the first time, the IRA chose a political process over violence.
By this stage, there had been smuggled crystal set radios in some of the wings. The word was sent over that when the result comes through, if it's a victory, there should be no roaring and shouting or squealing or whatever.
Sands Bobby, anti-H block, political prisoner, 30,000. Yeah! I declare that Bobby Sands has been duly elected to serve as a member for the South constituency.
I remember jumping down from my bed and jumping up and down, not making no noise. It was all silent screaming, if you like, you know. And I just thought, I mean, no doubt now looking back at it a bit naively, but we felt here it is, no MP, you know. They're not going to let this happen. They're not going to allow Bobby to die.
I just hoped that being elected MP would save his life and save everybody else's life. My main feeling then was, Jesus, we may have done it here. He may have done it. And feeling real pangs of joy and happiness. But I mean, that didn't last long.
There can be no question of political status for someone who is serving a sentence for crime. Crime is crime is crime. It is not political, it is crime.
3 weeks after his election, Bobby Sands, hunger striker and Member of Parliament, fell into a coma.
My son's dying, and I would like to appeal to the people for to remain calm and to have no fighting or cause no death or destruction. My son has offered his life for better conditions in prison, but not to cause further death outside. That's all I can say.
How is he today?
He's dying.
The Northern Ireland office in the last hour has issued a terse one-line statement. Mr. Robert Sands, a prisoner in the Maze prison, died today at 1:17. He took his own life by refusing food and medical intervention for 66 days.
I remember sitting in the cell and Father Toner, was the chaplain at the time, the cell door open and seeing Toner's face, and I knew right away Bobby was dead. He didn't have to say a word, he just put his arms around me and never said nothing.
Bobby Sands has filled the death columns of the nationalist Irish news, and today in West Belfast, his funeral was no ordinary Republican event. For the IRA, this was a major test of Catholic sympathy for the hunger strikers, and for the world's press, a carefully stage-managed affair.
More than 1,000 people marched in front of the British consulate. They carried a coffin draped in the Irish flag and chanted anti-British slogans. Demonstrators burned a figure of British Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher.
Mrs. Thatcher, she thought she was winning and she was losing. It was the biggest loss. Politically, she was losing. And she built up Sinn Féin to be a very powerful political party simply by her intransigence.
Within days, a second hunger striker, Francis Hughes, had died. So began a ritual of deaths, mass funerals and rioting on the street.
You would have heard the band lads going first. And obviously he jumped out of bed. That's another one dead. And then the rioting started. You would have heard a couple of shots, maybe here and there. Murder down the town.
Inside and outside the prison, the death toll mounted.
4 prisoners have taken their own lives deliberately. I do not know of any religious leader or politician who is urging me to give political status. Not one.
6 hunger strikers have starved themselves to death over the past 3 months, and 2 more will probably die this week.
Margaret Thatcher made a horrific mistake in the hunger strike.
The Loyalist paramilitaries were aware that the Republicans were gaining a political edge.
That was self-sacrifice, those guys. You know, it's a bad death. I know about death, so, you know, systematically starving yourself to death is a terrible way to go. But they believed in what they were doing, so yes, Republicans sort of grabbed the limelight.
In the maze, Loyalist prisoners could only look on.
If one faction embarked on a particular form of protest, then the other one couldn't engage in it, because that would be seen as supporting the other.
Propaganda-wise, Loyalists within the prison, they were nowhere, they were light years behind.
The propaganda value of the strike had peaked, but the strikers felt that to call it off now would be a betrayal of the men who died. Faced with this deadlock, Father Fole defied the hunger strikers by calling their families to a meeting.
I explained simply that Mrs. Thatcher was going to let them die. There's no doubt about that, you know. At that stage, 6 people had died, and the protest had got worldwide publicity, but that was now dying away, and that it was time to reconsider the thing and request that it should be ended.
In a parallel meeting, Gerry Adams, ex-prisoner and now leader of Sinn Féin, went to the maze to speak to the hunger strikers.
And he came in. I couldn't really see him anyway, the eyes was gone. But Tom McLwee, he took charge of the meeting. Gerry told us, says, any of us want to come off this hunger strike can come off it right now. And he says, Paddy, it started you first. He says, you seem to be the worst. And he asked me, I said no. And then he went around the rest of them. Everybody said no.
Kieran Doherty says, when that man there comes and tells me we've had the 5 demands, I'll end my hunger strike. Responsibility's with Maggie Thatcher, not with me.
I knew I was going to die, accepted it, and I was really, really happy with that decision.
But when Paddy Quinn fell into a coma, his mother stepped in and requested medical intervention.
Well, I just wanted to save my son's life.
And what condition was he in when you took this decision?
Well, he was unconscious.
I remember I was angry, you know, angry at myself and my mother, you know, for taking me off it.
I think he never should have went on the hunger strike. He wasn't fit for it.
Did you feel you'd failed?
I did to a certain extent as well, you know.
The hunger strike had been fatally undermined, but some still held out. As an Irish Republican named Mickey Devine approached death, his sister made a final visit.
The saddest part in all my life was when I had to take them 2 children and to say goodbye to their daddy. And the children were scared, I was scared, and he was scared. It was near the end then. But at that precise time he was blind, so I had to sit them up in the bed and tell him who was who. This is Michael, this is Louise, while he felt round for their face and hair.
On the 20th of August, Mickey Devine became the 10th man to starve himself to death.
When Bobby Sands died, there was 500,000 people at his funeral, and it hit the headlines of the whole world. When poor Mickey Devine died on the 20th of August, he only got small bits in the newspapers. But I think the provisionals knew themselves that the time had come, but they couldn't stop it. They'd lose too much political face by stopping it. It was good to have a scapegoat like myself came along and made a fool of myself, I suppose, and helped the relatives to bring it to an end.
When the surviving hunger strikers' families announced that they would request medical intervention to prevent any more deaths, the strike collapsed. On the 3rd of October 1981, after 98 days, it was all over. 10 men had died in a failed attempt to win concessions on prison conditions. But their long drawn-out deaths had consequences that went beyond the prison walls. the IRA had its first MP at Westminster. Politics now joined violence in the Republican armory. The Mays had given republicanism new martyrs and a new direction. By 1983, most of the protesters' demands had been quietly conceded. This new, more relaxed regime was intended to remove the Mays as a source of political friction.
Duty officer in the Northern Ireland office got the word every night that the Mays is quiet. There's no trouble in the Mays. Brilliant.
But the reality was very different. Under the leadership of Mick McFarlane, the IRA had simply changed tactics.
We began to look at avenues where we could get out of the place. We realised that it was labelled as Europe's biggest and most secure prison. We needed to look at certain members of staff who would be in key positions and suss out the psychology of the individual. I mean, I would engage in conversation with them every day of the week to build up a profile on them.
We had prisoners used to come up beside you and they would try and get you into conversation. You maybe have a Volkswagen keyring. They would come up and notice, oh, I see you driving a Volkswagen. What do you think of them and all that?
In building up the profile, what you're doing is trying to understand the person and to see what way he'll react. And particularly, if you want the key that he has to the front gate, is he going to give it? Or are you going to have to wrestle with him? Are you going to have to fight him? Are you going to have to stick a gun on his face?
By the 25th of September 1983, they had the information they needed. They also had 5 handguns, which had been smuggled into the prison.
There was a buzz, there was a tension in the air. I had gone round all the key points to be taken during the course of the morning, found out which guards were on which areas. So at about 20 or 2:45, everybody had moved into position. The lorry arrived, the food lorry. The driver and the helper were secured and brought in. He was threatened with a weapon and was told that Jerry Kelly would be sitting in the cab with him, dressed as a screw. Nobody had any compunction about taking whatever action was necessary in a fight to get out that front gate. When the fight started, batons were drawn and chisels were drawn.
The officer in the control room pulled an alarm button and he was shot in the head.
Everybody got out of the back of the lorry and it was hand-to-hand fighting at that period. It was mayhem.
The staff, barehanded, without any weapons, took these prisoners on.
Some prisoners had knives or chisels.
Jimmy Ferris, he got stabbed in the chest with a chisel supplied by the prison service. Screwdrivers, chisels, hammers, mallets, you name it.
Bobby Story just shouted out the gate, straight out, and everybody just made their way out onto the road. And there were a few cars there that were hijacked, and then we drove off in all sorts of different directions, heading for the border.
Last evening's escape was the biggest ever in the history of the British Peace.
Sinn Féin said today that there was jubilation in nationalist areas because of the escape.
1 prison officer died. 38 prisoners escaped, including Mick McFarlane, who remained on the run for 3 years. Although 19 were quickly recaptured, the escape was a propaganda triumph. The official report into the escape pins much of the blame on complacency among prison staff, who had felt they had been made into scapegoats.
There was a lot of people turned to the ultimate suicide. I was just sitting here thinking I could probably name you about 15 members of staff off the top of my head.
29 prison staff were killed. Most of the officers serving here were Protestant. They grew up in the same streets as the Loyalist gunmen imprisoned in the Maze. But the 2 groups gave each other little ground. Michael Stone was a hitman who had already murdered 3 people in the name of the Loyalist cause. In the Milltown Cemetery, he attacked an IRA funeral procession, killing 3 more. He received 6 life sentences. In the Maze, he was given a hero's welcome.
Big roar went up and prisoners welcomed me onto the wing. I was carried down the wing and paraded up and down.
Stone was an icon to Protestant paramilitaries and to the increasingly volatile loyalists inside the prison.
At that stage, the loyalists were causing the most problems in the prison service.
As a prison officer, I lost more close friends to loyalist terrorists than I did to Republican terrorists.
There was a protest where several women visitors to the jail, some guy's girlfriend gets stripped off and some guy's wife. We said there'll be repercussions. Guys put balaclavas on and they grabbed the screws, literally lifted them off the ground, took them to the big cell, used an electric shaver to shave their heads, stripped them naked, a bucket of piss that had been kept for a week, fermenting, thrown around them and humiliated. And the mom was shocked, big lump of a prison officer, but he was shocked, he's only human. But
it's shocking behaviour.
It was, you know, but it's do unto us, or as we do unto you, or do unto others as they do unto you, the old saying. And bottom line was, you us, we're going to with you, you know.
At the heart of the maze lies a paradox. Violence was the reason for its existence. But it was also in the maze that gunmen on both sides of the conflict began to consider politics rather than violence as a way of achieving their aims.
Despite all that happened in the prison, it was still a force for moderation, because here were people who were living together. But more importantly, we were beginning to explore political alternatives to the violence.
We had seminars, you know, on the politics of it all. Know your enemy, you know. I'll tell you more about Michael Collins, and, you know, it was highbrow.
Long Kesh became a university of learning, because people who didn't have the opportunity on the outside certainly got the opportunity on the inside.
It politicised me more. Years ago, I couldn't look at the likes of Adams or McGuinness on television. I now accept those people have political mandates.
Throughout the early 90s, Gerry Adams and Martin McGuinness were pushing the IRA towards a political solution. The decisive moment came in August 1994.
The IRA has said that it will end its campaign of violence in just 2 hours from now.
Political leaders have been poring over its wording. The Prime Minister says he's encouraged. Unionists remain suspicious.
The IRA move put the spotlight on the loyalist prisoners. Their leadership outside wanted to join the ceasefire, but couldn't do so without their prisoners' support.
We actually had a secret ballot on the wings on whether you wanted to back a ceasefire. It was a secret ballot because they'd all looked at me for, well, not leadership, but we're backing Stoner, whatever he thinks. Right or wrong, we'll back him.
Ladies and gentlemen, this is the instrument.
80% of the inmates backed a ceasefire. It was announced by the former loyalist leader in the maze, Gusty Spence.
Offered to the loved ones of all innocent victims over the past 25 years, abject and true remorse.
Their leaders outside may have spoken about remorse and peace, but inside the maze, the loyalists were less, not more peaceful.
I started the bonfires. I built the biggest bonfire going in that jail, and it was still burning the next day.
Stone and his fellow loyalists knew that with the peace process making slow progress, the authorities dare not confront them. Normal prison discipline had been sacrificed for the chance of peace.
These prisoners decided to have bonfires. Oh, well, let them burn a couple of grand's worth of equipment, or bedding and furniture and all the rest of it. Sure, keep them quiet. The lunatics ran the asylum.
In late 1997, these same men found themselves once more the focus of the stalling storm and peace talks. Among loyalist prisoners, confidence was low and suspicion high. Then, in the maze itself, loyalist leader Billy Wright was assassinated. Loyalist prisoners were on the brink of revolt. It was feared they would order a return to war.
Once again, the maze was the focal point of a troubled peace process today, as Mo Mowlam arrived for a visit that had been variously described as mad or brave.
In admission of their importance, the British Secretary of State came to reassure the loyalists in person.
It was imperative that she did see us. We told her the pressure we were under in the prison and the pressure the volunteer in the street was outside, you know, to retaliate.
It was straightforward, it was quite businesslike. And I was determined that the way to make progress with them was to not treat them as prisoners. If I treated them as kind of less than human, which when you think about what they'd done, was one's immediate feeling, but I buried that and said, okay, if we're going to get anywhere, we have to talk face to face, eye to eye. And I managed to shake hands, say hello, and talk.
She was well tuned into Ulster politics. Affable woman, but she could play hardball, and there were things said there, you know, but she was able to answer them, you know.
They feared that the government wasn't serious, that the talks had stalled, that their leadership on the outside of the prison was being led by the nose to a united Ireland, and they just felt, what was the point of engaging in this? They were just being made to look fools.
Language got a bit earthy at times, and she got a bit earthy with it as well. A few expletives thrown in, but I honestly think if Mo Mullen hadn't came to see us, that we would have just went then, well, nobody's word is for anything here, you know. It was that crucial.
The peace process survived, but one price was the early release of the Maze prisoners. Both Republicans and Loyalists saw this as central to any peace agreement. On July the 28th, 2000, most of the remaining prisoners were released. Supporters came to reclaim their heroes, while much of the rest of society looked on in horror.
Well, it's a bitter pill to swallow. This is part and parcel of putting this society to rest here, putting this society at peace and developing for the future.
It would have been difficult for somebody that lost a relative watching prisoners coming out, and I think you need to be conscious of that. No particular section had a monopoly on the suffering within the conflict, and I think that needs to get across. Once we have achieved that, we're on the road to healing the sickness in our society.
But that might prove optimistic in a society that has suffered 30 years of violence.
And what do you say to the people who say your release is too high a price to pay for peace?
I would say you could be right.
Michael Stone was released around 10 to 11, having completed just over 12 years of his life sentence for 6 murders.
It was said to me by a politician on release of all prisoners that it isn't just the IRA, the unionist community are frightened of. You know, he says, Michael, the middle class unionist community are terrified of you. And that sort of shocked me.
Returning 340 convicted paramilitaries to a troubled society is a risk. Many have not renounced violence, and the mere presence of others may provoke further conflict.
People have said to me, never whack you, Michael, we're going back to war. And I can't say anything about that, you know, because I was involved in retaliatory violence.
The peace in Northern Ireland is conditional at best. Ex-prisoners have already been involved in violence and intimidation. Loyalist leader Johnny Adair has been rearrested. The double-edged influence of the Maze is far from over, both for the society that created it and the men who spent their lives within its walls.
I don't regret being a volunteer, but the futility, believe it or not, of it all, you know. There's another body in the street. What does it achieve?
I have this sense of a huge lump of humanity having wasted their lives, who have wasted their time in prison, be they on one side of the bars or on the other side of the bars. Isn't that a waste? Isn't that a massive waste of humanity? Hasn't it all been a massive waste of humanity?